What if I told you there is a hospital in America where one room has been locked for more than 7 years and no one dares to open it? Why do night shift nurses whisper that they hear scratching on the walls, as if someone is still trapped inside? And what happened to the 2 guards who tried to step in, only to vanish, one losing his mind and the other never returning? These are not just ghost stories told to scare interns. They are real events documented by staff who still work there today. Tonight, I will take you inside the mystery of the Forbidden Room 413, a place that should have remained sealed forever. Stay with me until the end, because every detail will make you question whether you'd survive a night in that hospital. If you love and care about real horror stories, please give me a like, a subscribe, and share this video so I have the motivation to bring you more terrifying tales next time. At 3 in the morning, the hospital feels like another world. The hallways are silent, the fluorescent lights flicker, and even the hum of the machine seems to fade into the background. That night, while I was on duty, the quiet was broken by a sound I will never forget. Metal scraping against the inside of a locked door. Room 413, a room no staff member ever entered, at least not in the 7 years I had worked there. Security cameras picked up nothing unusual, just the closed door and the empty hallway. But if you turn up the audio, you can clearly hear it. A dragging sound, like surgical instruments being raked across the wall. Later, when I walked past, I noticed fresh scratches on the inside of the doorframe, the kind you don't just imagine. A janitor swore he saw fingerprints smeared in something dark, almost like dried blood. But by the time anyone else checked, the marks had vanished. And I'll be honest with you, this wasn't just fear playing tricks on a tired nurse.
Are you ready for this?
I felt it in my bones.
Not really.
The kind of chill you don't forget. It wasn't the first strange noise we had heard from that room, but it was the first time I truly believed the stories whispered on every night shift.
Did you hear about the
What made it
rumor?
worse was the timing.
Oh, what is it?
3 in the morning, the so-called witching hour, when people say the veil between the living and the dead is thinnest. Whether you believe that or not, I can tell you this: the sound was real, and so was the terror. And this was only the beginning, because the truth about room 413 had been buried for 7 long years, and the hospital staff carried more secrets than anyone dared to admit. Let me take you deeper into the legend behind this forbidden room. For 7 long years, room 413 had been locked, and with every year, the stories only grew darker. Nurses whispered that it used to be an operating theater where a patient bled out during a routine surgery. The official report said equipment failure, but people who were there that night swore the lights flickered violently, monitors glitched, and the patient's screams echoed long after his heart had stopped. Since then, no one has worked in that room again. I remember a senior nurse telling me she once saw the surgical lamp inside flicker on by
Please
itself,
finish the procedure.
even though the power had been cut off for years. Another staff member claimed to hear a woman sobbing through the door, begging for someone to finish the procedure. Security footage backs up some of these claims. Twice, the hallway cameras recorded the doorknob turning slowly on its own, though no one was inside. Even maintenance workers refused to step near it. One of them told me, half joking, half trembling, that if you press your ear to the door, you can hear the steady beep of a heart monitor. I never dared to try, but part of me believes him, because when you work the night shift, you learn quickly which rumors are just stories and which ones come from real experience. Personally, I think the hospital locked that room not to hide the accident, but to contain whatever was left behind. Call it energy, call it a spirit, or just call it trauma lingering in the walls. But it's there. I felt it every time I walked past. And the strange thing is, these weren't just ghost tales told to scare new nurses. Some of the evidence, scratches, noises, and those eerie camera recordings still exist. But the real terror began when people tried to test the stories for themselves.
That's when room 413 claimed more than just whispers. It claimed lives. Now let me tell you about the two men who dared to open that door.
There were only two men who ever dared to open the door to room 413, and neither of them walked away the same. The first was a night guard named Daniel. He was known for being tough, the kind of man who laughed at ghost stories. One shift, after hearing the scratching noises for weeks, he decided to prove everyone wrong. The security cameras captured him sliding his master key into the lock. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, the door creaked open. Daniel stepped inside, and that was the last time anyone saw him as himself. He didn't vanish completely, not right away. Later that night, another guard found him crouched in the hallway, rocking back and forth, whispering, "The plot is still dripping. It never stops." His uniform was soaked with sweat, and his fingernails were torn as if he had clawed at the walls. He was admitted to a psychiatric ward the next morning and never returned to work. The second was a maintenance worker named Carlos. Unlike Daniel, he didn't believe in curses. He was just curious. His coworkers begged him not to, but one night he went in anyway. The cameras show him stepping through the doorway, flashlight in hand. The strange part? The footage continues for almost 10 minutes, but he never comes back out. The hallway remains empty, the door half open, until another nurse finally shuts it. Carlos was never seen again. No body, no trace, just his toolbox left leaning against the wall. I know some people might say these are just rumors, exaggerated over time, but I've seen the old security logs. I've spoken to the nurse who swears she heard Daniel screaming through the vents that night. And personally, I don't think two grown men just vanish into thin air. Something inside that room took them, and the hospital quietly swept it under the rug. And yet, the story didn't end there, because years later, a new patient was wheeled in, one with no name, no records, and a warning on his chart that would tie directly back to room 413. One night, long after the rumors about room 413 had become routine whispers, a patient arrived with no name, no family, and no record of admission. He was simply wheeled in on a gurney by two paramedics who left without a word. His chart was almost blank, just a single warning in red ink: "Do not house near room 413. That alone sent a chill down my spine. Why would a hospital file include a note like that? The man looked ordinary at first glance. Middle-aged, pale, with a deep scar running across his chest, as if he'd already undergone surgery. But the unsettling part was his condition. He wasn't comatose, but he wasn't fully awake either. His eyes would flick open suddenly, staring at the ceiling with a terror so raw it made me uncomfortable to look at him. And in those moments, he whispered. Security footage from that night recorded him muttering phrases that still give me chills. "Don't open it. Don't let him finish." Later, when the janitor cleaned the floor beneath his bed, he noticed faint stains, dark, circular marks that looked eerily like footprints, yet no one had walked there. Samples were taken, but the lab results came back inconclusive, labeled simply as biological residue, non-human. I remember standing beside him during my rounds, and for a brief second his hand shot up, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. His voice cracked as he said, "He's still waiting in that room." The words weren't just random delirium. They felt deliberate, like a warning. To me, it was no coincidence. This man, whoever he was, had some connection to room 413. Maybe he had been a patient there years ago. Maybe he had survived something no one else did. But one thing was certain. His arrival reopened a chapter the hospital had tried to bury. And soon, the past would come crashing back, because the night the door to room 413 finally opened was the night none of us would ever forget.
It happened so fast, just 10 seconds, but long enough to burn itself into my memory forever. That night, the air in the hallway turned bitterly cold, as if someone had opened a freezer door. The overhead lights flickered violently, buzzing like dying insects. Then came the pounding. 3 heavy knocks from inside room 413, so loud the walls seemed to vibrate. I froze where I stood, heart hammering in my chest. On the security footage, you can actually see the doorknob turning on its own. The metal lock, which had been rusted shut for years, suddenly clicked open as though it had never been sealed. Slowly, the door creaked inward. For 10 agonizing seconds, it stood ajar, spilling out a draft that smelled like antiseptic and old blood. What I saw in that gap is hard to put into words. A figure stood there, barely illuminated by the flickering emergency light. A man in a tattered surgeon's coat, splattered with dried stains that could only have been blood. His face was ruined, as though half of it had been torn away, yet his eyes burned with something almost alive. And in his hand gleamed a surgical scalpel, catching the light in a way that made my stomach drop. When I later checked the floor outside the door, there were marks, wet, irregular shapes that looked like footprints but were smeared backward, as if something had been dragged into the room rather than out. One of the guards swore he heard faint murmurs through the intercom system, a voice repeating the words, "Procedure incomplete." I know how unbelievable this sounds. Part of me wishes I could dismiss it as exhaustion or a trick of the mind. But those 10 seconds were captured on camera, and though the footage was mysteriously erased the next day, I saw it with my own eyes. And I'll never forget the way that presence stared right through me, as if I had already been chosen. And yet, the most terrifying part wasn't what came out of that room. It was the chilling realization that whatever lived inside didn't need to escape. It only needed us to open the door. But the story doesn't end with a single night of terror. The truth revealed itself later through the scars it left on the people who survived. And that brings me to the final, haunting warning.
In the end, the hospital sealed room 413 once again, as if nothing had happened. The hallway was scrubbed clean, the cameras replaced, and staff were told never to mention that night. But those of us who were there knew the truth, because the aftermath followed us home. The guard who stood beside me that evening quit the very next day. Weeks later, I heard he was found in his apartment, walls covered with frantic scribbles. "Don't open it! Don't open it!" over and over again. Another nurse swore she kept waking up at exactly 3 a.m., hearing surgical instruments clattering in her kitchen, though nothing was ever there. As for me, I left that hospital. I told myself it was just for peace of mind, but the truth is, I couldn't bear to walk past that hallway again. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night with the distinct sensation that someone is standing at the foot of my bed, watching, waiting. I know skeptics will say it's exhaustion or stress or just imagination, but there were fingerprints on the inside of that door. Fresh, wet, impossible fingerprints that disappeared within hours. There were audio logs with voices we couldn't explain. These weren't coincidences. They were warnings. And so, if you ever work a night shift in a hospital, any hospital, pay attention to the rooms that stay locked. They are sealed for a reason. Some doors aren't meant to be opened, because what waits behind them isn't just a story. It's a consequence. So let this be my final warning. What happened in room 413 didn't end when the door closed again. It's still there, waiting, and the next person who dares to enter may not come back at all. If you believe in keeping these stories alive, if you value true horror that lingers after the lights go out, please give me a like, a subscribe, and share this video. It may just remind someone to think twice before turning a forbidden key.